In the Indian education system, there is a defining moment of panic. Right in the 11th grade, millions of students are handed an ultimatum. Pick science, commerce, or arts. You are expected to lock in your choice and lock in the rest of your life. This cultural obsession with locking in early comes from a highly celebrated model of success. We can call it the Tiger Path. Tiger Woods was handed a golf club at 7 months old. He spent his childhood and teenage years practicing one extremely specific physical motion. Now look at Roger Federer. Growing up, he dabbled. He played squash, he wrestled, and he swam. He only took tennis seriously much later in his youth. Schools and corporations constantly pressure us to follow the Tiger Path, but the data reveals a counterintuitive reality. People who wander, experiment, and delay their final career choice actually achieve greater long-term success than those who specialize on day one. To understand why wanderers eventually win, we must look at the environment where the game is played. The first type is a kind learning environment. Think of chess. The rules are entirely fixed, they never change overnight, and every time you make a move, you get immediate, accurate feedback. In a kind environment, early specialization works perfectly. You can memorize patterns by repeating them for thousands of hours. Because it relies purely on historical data, this is also exactly where artificial intelligence effortlessly dominates human players. But most of our lives do not happen on a chessboard. Modern startups, marketing, and the real-world economy exist in wicked learning environments. Here, the rules change without warning. The feedback you get is often delayed, inaccurate, or entirely missing. When you put a hyper-specialist into a wicked environment, they experience cognitive entrenchment. Researcher Philip Tetlock tracked top political analysts and economists for 2 decades. He found that the absolute deepest experts, the people who viewed the whole world through one narrow academic lens, made the worst predictions. They were completely blind to outside variables. Building a career today means navigating a wicked environment. If you try to survive it using the rigid playbook of a kind environment, you will quickly find yourself obsolete. The most successful professionals avoid early lock-in by going through what researchers call a sampling period. They spend their early years trying out different roles, switching industries, and testing various skills without locking into a singular identity. If we map out career growth over time on a graph, the early specialist starts with a massive advantage. They get higher starting salaries and rapid promotions right out of the gate. But around year 5 or 6, that growth curve completely flattens out. They hit this wall because they lack match quality, the economic term for how well your natural talents align with your actual day-to-day work. The specialist locked in so early that they trapped themselves in a poor match. The generalist, on the other hand, starts much slower. Their early career looks messy, but because they sampled broadly, they eventually find a role with incredibly high match quality. Once they do, their growth curve spikes upward, easily bypassing the specialist plateau. Switching your major in college or pivoting to a new industry in your 20s is not a delay. It is the strategic acquisition of match quality. This same principle applies to how we learn. The standard academic model heavily rewards block practice, cramming one subject intensely to top a standardized test the next morning. It feels incredibly fast, but the brain deletes that information almost immediately after the exam. Cognitive scientists have found that durable memory requires desirable difficulties. You actually have to deliberately frustrate your brain by taking long breaks between study sessions and by mixing completely different subjects together, like jumping from calculus directly to history. Generalists seem to learn slower because they pull from so many varied fields, but that friction forces the brain to build flexible frameworks, allowing them to solve strange, unpredictable problems that a rote memorizer would completely freeze on. You can see this flexibility perfectly in the story of Nintendo. Back when the company was primarily making playing cards, they hired a man named Gunpei Yokoi. He was not a highly specialized electronics engineer, he was a general maintenance worker. While rival companies poured millions into cutting-edge processors, Gunpei developed a philosophy he called lateral thinking with withered technology. Instead of inventing the newest thing, he took cheap, outdated components that everyone already understood and combined them in unusual ways. He took basic calculator chips and old monochrome LCD screens and merged them to create the Nintendo Game Boy. It was technically inferior to everything else on the market, yet it completely dominated the video game industry. Winning in business rarely requires having the absolute deepest expertise in a single tool. It requires the ability to take old, established concepts from completely different domains and connect the dots. If your resume looks a little scattered, maybe you started in engineering, spent a year in design, and now you work in marketing, you do not need to hide it. That combination gives you a distinct analytical and creative lens that a traditional linear professional cannot replicate. You don't have to quit your job impulsively to build this. You can start your sampling period safely through side hustles and passion projects, testing the waters until you find that high degree of match quality. You can also train your brain to think laterally starting today. Dedicate 20 minutes a day to reading about a topic that has absolutely nothing to do with your primary industry. Exposing yourself to diverse ideas allows you to offer a unique, intersecting value proposition. You stop competing on raw technical depth and start competing on perspective. For leaders and parents, the mandate is clear. Forcing young minds into high-pressure engineering and medical pipelines creates brittle thinkers. We need to encourage exploration and openly reward the friction of creative failure. Specialization is an incredibly useful tool when applied to a predictable problem, but in a dynamic, AI-driven economy, over-specialization acts like a blindfold. Having your hands in multiple disciplines doesn't mean you are lost, distracted, or falling behind. It means you are building your range.